Okay, so I'm back in Cinema 4D, and I'll jump back and forth between my thumbnail sketch or my storyboard or my animation concept sketch, uh, just to remind myself of exactly how the animation is going to unfold. Now remember, I indicated frame 1, 30, 60, and 90, and that's going to correspond with the amount of time that we have inside Cinema 4D. Now it's not really important that that I map out those numbers exactly, but I'm going to start roughly at frame 1, 30, 60, and 90 for my keyframes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to position the playhead at the beginning of time, and I'm going to start with that first position of the keyframe. Now, remember, I have this animation oriented. Up and down is obviously the y-axis. The x-axis, or the red axis, is left to right on my screen. That's going to play an important role when we start taking a look at the mechanics of this animation and tracking how this thing moves along y and x. It's not going to move at all along the z space, and that becomes important a little bit later. So just make a note of that and make sure that your animation is oriented this way rather than bouncing back in space along the blue axis or the z axis. Because the demonstration will kind of head off in another direction when I start to explain f-curves. So let me establish that first frame. So I'm just lifting my sphere up and just kind of at an arbitrary height, and that is going to be the first frame of my animation. So if I look over here at my sketch, okay, that Y position, the ball starting up off the ground plane is right around here. Okay, so I'm up in space. I have my keyframe positioned. I have my ball or my sphere positioned, and I'll just hit the record. I'll mark that first keyframe. Okay, now remember that recipe of animation. We're going to first advance the playhead, and I'm going to advance the playhead to frame 30. And I'll go take a look and see what my sketch tells me that I should do. So I'm going to move in the X space, and I'll also move down the Y space. So I'll basically just move it according to my screen to the right, or I'm going to advance the position of the animation, but move it down closer to the ground. So I'll just kind of move that in this direction, and also move it down. And I'm just looking to see where that ball starts to intersect with the floor. Okay, and I can always tweak this position later, and so I'll just live with what this is, and I'll mark that keyframe. So I'm already establishing that animation path. Okay. I'll jump back over to my sketch, and again remind me that I'm going to move forward in the X position and up along the Y position. And this is, I don't have to keep referring to this at this point because this is a pretty intuitive path for the animation based on the bouncing ball, and I will repeat this demo really quickly, but I'm shooting for frame 60. Okay, so I'll advance the playhead, I'll move this up and over a bit, and I'll mark frame 60, and I'll advance to frame 90, and I'll move this over and down. I'm just looking for that to intersect with the ground plane, and I'll hit record. Okay, so now I definitely have an animation path going on. Okay, and if I hit the rewind button and I hit the play button, you'll see that my bouncing ball doesn't look much like a bouncing ball at all. In fact, it looks more like a roller coaster. Okay. I can scrub the playhead to approximate the motion. And this has everything to do with what's called the F-curve, or the animation curve. If I look at the way that this animation path plays out, we basically have this spline, or this path, and for those of you that have spent some time using the tools in Illustrator, you know that this what's referred to as interpolation, or the degree with which this curve changes is relative to this point and relative to these control points in the spline, which we'll see here in a minute. I can select this animation, or this keyframe, and I have a point in time with which I can change and I can move this around. I don't really want to do that in this view. But right now, the transition as this ball enters towards this keyframe and exits the keyframe, this transition is smoothed out. Okay, and this is handled by default. There's what's called spline interpolation on these keyframes because typically 9 times out of 10, motion needs to be smoothed out. It needs to be smoothed in and smoothed out, or eased in and eased out, and those are concepts that are covered in the principles of animation. And so by default, Cinema 4D lets this feature default so that we're smoothing out any transition, okay? Now, that's all well and good, but it really doesn't solve our problem for the bouncing ball. So if I rewind and play this animation again, there's a way to correct for this to make it look less like a roller coaster and more like the bouncing ball that we established in our sketch. And we're going to do that using the F-curves, and we're going to do that using a different layout in Cinema 4D. And I'll share that with you during our next presentation.